This podcast is kindly sponsored by Camera Museum of London at 44 Museum Street. Welcome to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host Richard Lipman. Today we're interviewing Jeff Innocent. Your upbringing. Tell us.
Yeah, I come from what might be considered a fairly stereotypical East End family, working class, criminal associations, although my mum, who's still alive, doesn't like me saying that. She prefers the term.
Were you beaten up
Entrepreneur.
by your parents or by the kids
No.
locally? Did you get into fights or?
Oh yeah, but I wasn't beaten up. But yeah, I guess kids, they used to do boxing, still do.
Okay. Where exactly in the East End? Or?
Canning Town, yes.
Canning Town, my God, yeah, that's. Yeah. I think Charlie Chaplin and Gandhi stayed there once.
Well, Beckton that was, Beckton Road. I know exactly where that was, and I go past that spot on a regular basis, and still am amazed that that's where they met. Just down the road. I mean, there's no plaque or anything. You think, what an amazing meeting of two giant historic figures in Beckton. Down the road from Asda. But it's all lost, isn't it? A lot of stuff is lost. There should be something there to say that. So that's the general area I come from. The docks was there at that time, of course. So I think generally people either worked on the docks or stole from the docks.
And this was in the 1960s?
Well, I was born in 1955.
Right.
So we're talking about the 60s, really. Yeah, sure. And the docks were still thriving at that time.
Right.
So, yeah, my mum prefers for me not to say criminal but entrepreneur because she thinks that's grasping.
Nice.
Do that.
So did they know
so she's still alive, so I'm being careful.
Oh, did they know the craze at the time?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the craze thing is a little bit overblown. Lots of people were criminals without any cray associations.
Okay.
There's a sort of mythology built around.
Well, how would you make money as an entrepreneur back then, sort of using methods that weren't necessarily deemed legal?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people used to rob banks in those days, didn't they?
There's no banks anymore.
Jewelers, building societies. There's a lot of that kind of thing, blagging and robbing and lots of different things.
There were no cameras, right?
There weren't any cameras. In fact, Billy Hill, the wartime criminal, he invented the smash and grab as well. There hadn't been any of that. There weren't even alarms at one point. So the Billy Hill, the famous wartime criminal, invented the smash and grab. That had never been done. People hadn't even thought about smashing windows and emptying out jeweler shops and running away. It's quite a simple thing, isn't it?
And how did your relatives get involved in that?
Well, I think you just grow up in that culture. Lots of people are earning their living in those ways, in those days, in that world.
Why was jobs hard to come by those days?
Well, yeah, I guess so. Or maybe I think sometimes if you grow up in that culture, that's quite a natural way to live your life anyway. It's not questioned. You don't think, I'll go and get a job. But of course, we're talking about in this period, largely uneducated working class people, hadn't finished schooling, not necessarily skilled. So it's quite common for people.
Is there anything from that time that you picked up and turned it into a story or a joke?
Not explicitly. I mean, I tend to work implicitly in that, I don't like to be necessarily obvious about that. I like things to unfold or be revealed, or just you can work that out about someone rather than spelling it out. I think that's more intriguing in stand-up comedy. Show don't tell, I think, is one of the terms I use. So I'd rather someone go, I think this guy's had a bit of a shady background, than me spell it out.
Yes. Yes, through stories. What happened later in your teens?
Well, you were talking about interventions earlier on, and I would say when I was about 15, I don't think I was ever going to follow in the family business, let's put it that way. I don't think I was cut out for that. I was a bit arty, I was in the school plays and all that kind of stuff. But there was when I was about 15, some hippies moved into the area in a squat, and they were running some kind of squat hippie kind of commune thing.
Right.
And they also ran a drama group for the local East End kids. I think that was the moment, that was the turning point for me, where I thought, whoa, there's an alternative here to the life I lead. And also my parents didn't like it, which is always an appealing thing when you're a kid, isn't it? You know what, my parents don't like this sounds good. And so I'm not saying it saved me, because I don't want to say I was going to be following in the family business, but I think that was a major thing. And they were called the East End Abbreviated Soapbox Theatre, and they did street theatre. John Hegley, the poet, also came out of that. I don't know if you know him. There are one or two people that went on to become performers, but that was a massive turning point. And I'd done productions at school, but I think from that moment, you know, there was an alternative life, and I embraced that totally.
How did you memorize lines back then? I assume you were reading off scripts, or what did you do?
Well, you just learn to do that, I guess. You know, that's not a big thing. You know, so
Right.
that was something that I see as a major shift.
So you were inspired.
Yeah, so did plays, did street theatre, hung around with hippies, you know.
Did you like the lifestyle?
Oh, I did, yeah, loved that. In fact, I think I shifted from that kind of skinhead sort of style. I just thought, wow, I like this, grew my hair, started wearing fur coats from the Oxfam shop, all this stuff that my mum hated. I think my dad was away, working away we used to call it, for quite long periods in those days, so I was able to just get on and do what I wanted. But I think I've never really felt comfortable with that whole East End, Cockney, working class, blokey kind of thing. I've never been comfortable with that. I had a lot of friends that were like that and hung out with them, but I think I was always the one that was sort of good at art or in a drama group. You know, those kind of kids who are a bit different. So always enjoyed performing, showing off, which is what I think stand-up comedy is quite a lot of, showing off.
Was there a huge divide between the classes, between the rich and the poor? Was there a glass ceiling in the arts?
Well, I wasn't aware of it at that time. I was too young to be aware of those social, cultural restrictions. That probably happened a bit later. I went to grammar school, but it was still working class kids there. And I don't think I'd ever really been aware of that until I got older and became a little bit more politically conscious, because I left school and became a window dresser in menswear, men's fashion, about 1970, that would have been. Kings Road, Carnaby Street. So even then I'm still from a working class background doing something a little bit arty.
Yes.
And working in the King's Road when you're a teenager, that's like being in show business. It's such an amazing, the shop is so amazing.
Was Mick Jagger around?
Well, I didn't see Mick Jagger, but it would have been, you know, early 70s, people walking around the King's Road. I do remember, though, you often used to see stars, of course, in the King's Road. I remember Yul Brynner, you know, and they'd come into the shop to buy shirts and that.
Right.
Just big, famous James Coburn, like Hollywood movie stars would come in to buy a tie or stuff. Just amazing. It was amazing. But it was a great life for a young guy. And also I enjoyed being a window dresser, and that was a bit arty. And I've always really been into clothes and fashion, and still am. In fact, I spend a lot of my time I go to vintage clothes shops and you know, enjoy fashion and clothes and what that means very much. So it was a great period in my life, actually. And I was still doing drama in the evenings as well, in one or two sort of theatre groups that were around in the East End. There was the Half Moon Theatre in Adey Street that was in an old synagogue, and it was like a left-wing Brechtian theatre kind of. And I was only a kid here, but it was just, loved all of that.
What did you love about it?
Well, it was very different from my world, of course, you know. And I guess most of these people were from a middle class background, but I didn't really understand that at that time.
The actual plays at the Brechtian Theatre. So you'd get up on stage. You'd have to learn the lines, right? Were you a character?
Yeah, sure, or whatever. Of course.
What character would you play?
Well, all different. I mean, we were kids. I mean, we did stuff from a local playwright called Billy Colville, who was a bit of a cultish East End working class playwright. We did Brechtian stuff. We did Chekhov. We did Ionesco. Quite highbrow, radical theatre stuff. I didn't know it was radical theatre. I was just enjoying being in a theatre group.
And people were watching you?
Oh, sure, yeah. And actually, once I can't remember the play that we were doing, and we had a few days at the Half Moon Theatre doing a play, and in the interval, I did stand-up comedy. So I was about 16 then, but it wasn't my stuff, it was just stuff that I got off the TV or just old jokes. And it was something, it tied in with the theme of the play that there would be somebody in the interval doing stand-up comedy. And what I really remember about this probably might have been 1970, I was telling these jokes, but they were just old jokes off the telly. I think there was a TV programme at that time in 69 called The Comedians, and it was all those old northern comics like Bernard Manning and people like that. So I just took those jokes, and I remember being out there telling these jokes, and a woman shouting out, "That's sexist," and I thought, I don't even know what that was. So the counterculture was in full swing then. You know, the radical ideas about gender that were developing, and I'd never come across any of this at all. So that was an education as well. You're sexist, and I thought, I don't know what that means. And of course, obviously on reflection, I know exactly what it was.
Feminism and
but we hadn't really, in the mainstream, we hadn't come across these ideas at that time.
Do you remember what the joke was?
Oh, I don't remember the specific joke. I mean, most of those jokes, I guess, in those days were sexist or racist. That was common currency in club comedy in those days. I don't know if I'd have even been aware of what racism meant actually at that time.
Of course, the migration was at a much lower level
than
it is today, for example.
Yeah. So all of that, having that influence, those outside influences, obviously was a great thing to have. Your ideas becoming politicized to some extent, and being creative, performing.
To be part of that scene, how much of it involved just knowing people and sort of being part of it, going to social... I mean, would you go to parties? Would you hang around?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Did you have to be in the in crowd in order to get the work,
Yeah, maybe.
so to speak,
well, I mean, it wasn't work at that time, of course. You weren't
paid?
I wasn't being a professional entertainer or performer. It was an amateur thing, but it was adult and quite a high level, and in professional theatres like the Half Moon. So it wasn't about that, but definitely something that I'm very thankful that I came across. But I sometimes wonder if you're that kind of person, you'll find it anyway. If you're someone who's not happy with where you are and you're looking for something, whether you would have found it or not, whether I would have found that alternative, where I was always open to that. As I said before, I've never really been comfortable in that blokey kind of thing, And even in my gang, I was in a bit of a gang. I was always the guy that made people laugh, or the guy that was a bit arty, or, you always have someone like that in a gang, don't you?
Can you tell us?
I wasn't the best fighter in my gang, let's put it that way,
Yeah. I'm just quickly taking out my camera so I don't forget to take a picture of you at the end of the interview. Tell us about the scariest moment of your life.
The serious moment?
The scariest.
The scariest? Oh, wow. You've thrown that question on me. I wish I'd had time to think about this. I don't know. I can't remember. I can't think. I'm going to have to come back on you with this one.
Yes.
I don't want to rush this. I mean, I've been scared, been in high-risk situations quite a lot through coming from that background, when you're in a gang, we used to get into gang fights and stuff, and but scariest moment, I don't know. I'll come back. It's probably quite a few. I couldn't choose.
And then back in the 20s, then you're working in the 70s, you're working at King's Road, and you continued, right? to work?
Yeah, well, I did that. I did. Well, there's another shift, I think, as well that sort of happened in the late '60s in my discovering Jamaican music, which was probably something I'd been familiar with because I'd grown up in a fairly multicultural area. My grandmother lived in Campbell. I used to visit her. I always remember being attracted to what was going on, not quite working it out, but I think when I was a skinhead, that was their music in the late '60s, and I think discovering Jamaican music was a big shift as well, because it then meant, even though I came from a very white, working class, possibly racist sort of background, which was the norm, falling in love with Jamaican music meant that I've got to enter into a different world where I want to listen to that music. Then you start, and then of course at the same time, that first generation of working class black kids who had come over post Windrush were coming of age, were around my age. So now I'm the first generation of white working class blokes that has got black friends, bringing black people to the house, which had never happened before. So I think that was a big shift. That was a change. So now my social world was changing. And I was going to clubs where they played reggae, which meant, often I was the only white person. Going to record shops where I was the only white person. So in those days, there wasn't as much of it wasn't as mixed as we might say now. It was separate worlds. So I ended up having sort of white friends, black friends, hippie friends, gangster friends. It was all very compartmentalized. It wasn't like, I don't know how old you are, but I think, for example, the whole rave scene seemed to change that and bring people together. But before that wasn't the case.
So would you go to Brixton? In that case?
Brixton, really, not necessarily Brixton, because there was Hackney, there were lots of other places, Hackney, did you go to Brixton? I went where record shops were, I went where clubs were, or blues parties, or that kind of thing. Jamaican house parties that are called blues parties. So that was I would say that was an intervention as well. That was a whole big shift in my life, that discovery, and then that whole new world. And there was also a world that was in opposition to the world that I'd come from. So I'm juggling different worlds that sort of collide in some way.
Did you...
But I managed to do that quite easily, and I realise I am someone who does that anyway, and that's how I live my life.
And interpersonal relationships, what about girlfriends? Were they...
Well, yeah, I think what happens is, obviously now as I'm getting older and I'm in my 20s and I'm starting to just really go to black clubs, black environment, largely Caribbean at that time. There weren't so many people from West Africa then. I'm now having black girlfriends, and that's a big shift as well. And at that time, because it wasn't as mixed, I hate the word mixed, but let's just use that, you having to make a decision because people won't go with you. If I'm having a black girlfriend, that changes everything now. You don't feel comfortable in a culture where people are just casually racist as a norm. So you're now putting yourself in a position where you're making decisions where you think, well, I can't hang around with you anymore, or I can't do this anymore. So that was a big shift on a personal level. Once you have a black girlfriend, you can't be with your white mates who want to do racist jokes. You're not comfortable with that. So that was a big shift and a big change, I would say.
So you were able to adapt, right?
Yeah, adapt. But also I started collecting Jamaican music, and that became my big thing. And then I also started to DJ Jamaican music as well. So that put me into different social situations.
Which social situations do you recall?
Well, I'm now the DJ at the parties I was going to as the only white person. I'm now one of the DJs playing in those parties.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Was there live music ever?
No, I did go to watch live music because I'm into lots of different music. There was a big live music scene in the early 70s with all the bands. There was a fantastic live music circuit, kind of like function suites of pubs really, but it was all bands that went on to become famous, Led Zeppelin and Queen, and these people were playing that circuit when they first came out. So that was the live music scene that I was on. As far as Jamaican music, it's not actually a live music medium, it's a record medium, because people would go to listen to Jamaican music on sound systems. So in Jamaica, you went and listened to DJs playing on sound systems. It wasn't a live music scene. So Jamaican music, although there is a live music scene, but generally it's about records and sound systems and DJs. And so I became part of that as well.
And back in and in your 30s, just before comedy, was it continuation of?
What do you mean? Well,
continuation of the way you were
Well,
living?
it was, except then what happened is, so I'm still a window dresser in my, up until my early 30s, and which is still great, but I'm no longer in the King's Road. All that's gone. I'm now working for independent shops here and there. Still enjoying it. It's still a good job. The music is becoming very important. But then what happened is I made the decision to go to university at 32 as a mature student to do cultural history at University of East London. So I did that degree and I stayed there to do another one. So I had 5 years in as an sort of academic, if you like. So I embraced that as well, you know. But that was a good thing, you know, and that was another, I guess, intervention in that one of the things about coming from a working class background, no matter how bright you are, there's always something about not being educated. You can be self-taught up to a point, and I was very bookish. But I also had one of the groups of friends that I was living with, you know, there would have been people that I moved in with in bedsits. They're all older than you. They'd all been to university. They were teachers, that kind of thing. And I always felt a sort of inadequacy, a kind of inadequacy that I hadn't had just a basic kind of education, you know, sort of above A-level kind of education. And at that time, the government paid you to go to university. They gave you a grant, they gave you money. And this is hard to believe, but I also had a mortgage at that time, and they paid towards your mortgage. I mean, I know, it's remarkable compared to how it is now. And I think it must have been part of a general idea to educate the nation. So then I, you know, got into that for 5 years, and that was a fantastic period. I mean, I didn't want to leave university at all. It was just, I thought, oh, this is where I belong. Arguing, debating, reading. And it helped kind of round me off to some extent. So that was a major thing as well. And I don't think I could have done the comedy without that.
Right.
Or certainly not as well as, or how I do it now. I think that learning to marshal your ideas and arguments, you know, and to organise your ideas, and reading and becoming more educated, obviously must make you a better comedian, I would have thought.
How do you organise your ideas?
How do I?
Yeah, at the beginning, how did it all, you know, would you write?
Well, when I'm thinking about comedy, you mean?
Yes.
Or yeah, I think I do. I think I have a fairly formal start where I think about the premise and what my argument is, like one would in an essay at uni. You know, what's my argument? What direction, what angle am I going to take on this? And then how I kind of put that together, I think is very much the way that someone would organise an essay, actually.
And what about other comedians, for example? You know, there were people 10, 20 years ago, well, you know, we've got Mr. Bean, we've got, he's controversial now, but Russell Brand and others. What's your take on, and then John Cleese, what's your take on these?
Well, they're
people?
three very different, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Controversial comedians, you mean?
Television, right? Is television different to stand-up comedy, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think Mr. Bean, for example, is comedy acting, isn't it?
Right.
Russell Brand, he wasn't. I mean, I don't know if he was a controversial. I mean, he's become controversial as a person.
Yes.
I don't know if his comedy was that controversial. He was very talented, actually. I remember he supported me on a tour. I was in Ireland when I was quite new myself, and they gave me him as a sort of support act. And he was very talented. He took risks. And I always thought he's not going to be on the circuit. He's someone who the circuit can't contain somebody like him. And I was right, because he went on to MTV. He became an MTV. Was it MTV? Is that what they called it? the music TV channel, the first one.
MTV.
So that's where he went then. But I don't know, what happened to him after that. Mr. Bean, of course, I think he comes from the live circuit initially, but is a TV act. So what I've realised is, and it's taken me a long while to realise this because I'm quite critical of comedians, I'm quite a purist in a sense, is that there are audiences for all kinds of comedy. If you think about where we are now, there's an audience for Chubby Brown, there's an audience for Jim Davidson, there's an audience for me, and I think it's about finding that audience. I started doing comedy, I did a workshop with Tony Allen, who was one of the architects of the whole alternative comedy movement, which was very much a critique of mainstream comedy, very much an attack on the kind of comedy that I thought I could get away with in the theatre that time. And
right.
And so so that was a good. That was again. I don't think I could have done it without him.
How would he teach you, Tony Allen?
Well, what he was about, his particular style, because I do comedy courses as well, and I've very much lifted his style, and I think he's very big on not on teaching you to write jokes or teaching you to form your routines as I do with my essay style. His is about you finding you and being natural and being yourself, which is actually the hardest part of comedy. Lots of people can write jokes, but being you and not a manufactured you is probably the thing that's the hardest thing to do. And you see it all the time, that people are not themselves. Trying to be yourself on stage can take years. Stripping off the onion layers. And I think there's an ego thing, and I'm quite. That's one of the advantages I think I've got as an older comedian. I haven't got that ego where I want to be. It's all about ego and wanting to look good, and I've lost that. I had that a bit when I started, but there's something great about being older and not having that as your driving force. I like to show off. I like to wear cool clothes on the stage and that. But it's not about look at me and aren't I clever, and it's changed, it's shifted. So that's taken me a while to get to that.
What other comedians you influenced by?
Alexis Sal. Alexis Sal, I love what he used to do and still does. I don't know if he works live anymore, but I just love that combination of politics, history, humour. One of the jokes that I think really encapsulates what he does is he said, my parents were communists, but he grew up in Liverpool. He says, my parents were communists and big Liverpool football fans, and we had a photograph above our mantelpiece of Lenin scoring the winning goal for Liverpool in the 1962 FA Cup final, the best retouching job the KGB have ever done. And I just think, wow, that's so clever and just in every way. So Alexis Sal, I'm not saying I sit down and listen to him, let's try and be like Alexis Sal, but I don't think that's how influence works. But certainly Alexis Sal is one of my favourites. And also, maybe from an earlier period, way back, maybe someone like Max Miller, who's a game changer in stand-up comedy. But Alexis Sal for sure, yeah.
Mm. And where'd you get your ideas from?
Well, it's tricky, because I don't know. I think when you start, you kind of manufacture comedy because you think I've got to write this and I've got to write in that way. But once you become confident about who you are and what you do, I think you just allow yourself to, what do I think about this? What do I think about that? And you have the confidence to have opinions. And so I don't quite know exactly where they come from, but I'm certainly have an agenda where I like to be relevant, that's for sure.
Right, relevant.
Yeah, okay. I'm big on relevance. I'm not interested in just making people laugh. Uh-huh. I think there's a play by Trevor Griffiths called Comedians that came out in 1978. It's on YouTube. It's about an hour and a half long. it's a bit dated now because it was 1978, but it anticipates alternative comedy. So it's a night school. The setup is a night school, and there's a teacher who teaches all these different people stand-up comedy. And they've got very different ideas, some very backward and outdated, and he's trying to, in a similar way to Tony Allen. And one of the things he said, one of the lines, I'm paraphrasing, is he said, look, it's not just about the laughs. You know, a true comedian's not just looking for laughs. They push through the laughter. They're looking to change the situation. And that's always stuck with me. I thought, yeah, you know, if you can make people laugh, but also make them think and change the way they think about things. Not that that's what I set out to do necessarily, but I hope that could happen. So, yeah.
You're going to continue to change things. What are your future plans? What's happening?
Well, at the moment, like I said, I'm in the middle of a national tour that's come about, thankfully, because of this Instagram popularity. So this year, I'll be, up until December, finishing that national tour. But at the moment, I'm now starting to develop the next show. So this show that I'm doing at the moment is a bit of a greatest hit show because the Instagram thing happened suddenly, so we seized the moment. So I did a show with what I've got in my repertoire, which is not an hour show. It's a collection of stuff that I do in the clubs. But now I'm thinking about, you know, what do I want to do for the next show? So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Can you give us a little taster or spoiler or about the future?
No, I don't. I'm not really sure. You know, I'm not really sure. But it will be relevant. I mean, I'm looking at all the topics that I'm interested in, and I looked at them. I thought they're all contemporary. They're all relevant. They're all, you know, liable to make people think.
What about internationally? Do you want to?
It's interesting that, isn't it? Because I don't know where else it would work for me because I'm quite not colloquial as such, but very London, you know. And my colleague Mickey Flanagan didn't even bother to go to America because he's really local. I mean, he's really London, and I don't even know if they'd understand his accent. So I don't really. I mean, I'd quite like to go to New York to try. I mean, I'd quite like to go to the East Coast of America and try. But Europe's tricky, you know, because even if they speak English, they don't really know your cultural references. But I think if anywhere, but actually someone was thinking of Nigeria. Now Nigeria has a massive stand-up comedy scene. I'm very familiar with Nigeria culture because my wife is Nigerian, or my ex-wife is Nigerian, let's get this right. And so I'm very familiar with West African culture as well. So, and I've had a look at a couple of clips of Nigerian stand-up comedy. It's just unbelievable. I'm not saying the standard necessarily, but the whole showbiz aspect, and it's a bit like going to a massive church or something. So I wouldn't mind giving it a try, you know, in Nigeria.
What about stadiums? Can you get into stadiums in Nigeria?
No, it's funny about stadiums. I'm not famous enough for stadiums. Who knows, that might happen, but I'm getting on a bit, so it better happen quick. But it's funny, I saw a picture of somebody. It was Ramesh Raghunathan, who's a very popular TV comic, and he was at the O2. And it looked like there were 1 million people there. I just don't know. Now, that one gig will probably set him up for life. You know, someone like me, that would be more money than I've ever seen from that one show. However, I think once you have to put screens on the stage so that people can see you, then I think it's lost, you know. So I'm happy enough to do art centres, theatres, 500 capacity or whatever. I don't know at what point it gets so big where you just think that this is something else now.
So I know a lot of comedians today like to go on stage and they look at their audience and they pick on them. Is that because they've got no ideas in their head?
What they call that is crowd work, and that's become increasingly popular over the last few years. Right. And usually it's the compere that does that. Acts really shouldn't be doing that. I mean, I'm very strict on this kind of thing. I think if you're an act, you've got to have something to talk about, something to say. Once you start breaking off and asking the audience questions, I suspect you haven't got enough material. That's why you're doing it. But I think it's fair enough for compares to do that. But it's not something I'm interested in. I'm not, I have my moments, but I'm not really interested in finding out about the audience. I want them to find out about me. I think that's what the deal should be.
What about AI? You worried that AI?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how that could work. I think we're safe because we're live.
Okay.
You know, I think if we're, although it's not to say it's always going to be negative, but I think if I don't know how that can interfere with live performances, so I'm not worried about that. It'd be quite funny though to put the stuff in and see what it comes out with, an AI version of me.
What about competition? Do you ever think about, he or she is doing better than me, or this joke is better than mine, or I don't like that?
No. I mean, I'm not really
that.
competitive, only with myself. You know, I think what I like to think is that good comedians have got their style, their content that's unique to them, and it doesn't matter what other people are doing. I mean, I'm probably a bit of a miserable old bloke when I go to comedy clubs if there are certain things I don't like. There's certain things I don't like. I don't like crowd work. I don't like seeing people do crowd work. I don't like people sitting down on stools on the stage. I've got my things that I don't like. That's becoming a development as well. Comedians sitting down to do stand-up comedy. But what they do is they do it where they think they're going to up the significance of what they're going to say. They start the story and they go, let me tell you all about it, and then they go and sit down as if this part's really serious now. So I've got my little quirks and things, but really the best thing to do is just get on with what you do and think about what you do and not what other people are doing. And
are there things that you're allowed to say, not allowed to say these days? Is it?
Well, I mean, I don't ever feel it's an interest. But at the moment, of course, there are lots of debates about censorship in stand-up comedy. And I guess there are things that you're not allowed to say, but I don't really think about that because I think because of my age and my background, I'm quite confident in what I believe and what I think. So I feel quite safe in going ahead with my thing. I mean, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because there are some things that you can say that the audience think that you shouldn't say, but you feel quite confident. So I have a joke again about my wife where I say, you might have noticed I'm wearing hearing aids, and that's because my wife is Nigerian. A lot of white people are not sure what to do with that. You know, they're not sure if they're allowed to laugh at that. Whereas black audience laugh all day long at that. So there are things that I'm confident about saying that it's the audience that are the problem, not the comedians, I think, where they can be super sensitive and not sure what's allowed. So, I think I prefer an older audience in that respect, who are more confident in what they think.
Can you tell us about your best gig ever?
Oh, I don't think there is a best gig in that I was better at this gig more than the others, but there was I'm thinking I won a competition called the British Comedian of the Year about 3 years ago, actually, and you do all these heats and quarterfinals. It's a nationwide thing. I'm not really into competition, but I got into it because it was £10,000 was the prize, and I thought, whoa, I'm a bit skint, And I ended up winning it, but that gave me a great deal of satisfaction. Also, because I'd forgotten my hearing aids, so when I got there, I thought, well, I can't win this. I haven't got my hearing aids. I can't hear the audience properly. I can't hear myself properly. But I've got to go ahead with it because I couldn't go home. See, and what happens is when you can't hear properly as a comedian, you tend to shout a bit and get a bit ranty, right? But that's what the evening needed, a big shouty, ranty comedian. So remarkably, I won it through not having my hearing aids. But it was a great gig, and I remember one of the things I am really good at doing is editing on the hoof. So if for example, I would go to do a 20-minute set and somebody said, oh, look, can you just do 15? We've got I'm great at sort of cutting it down and getting to the point very quickly. And I did that. And so I would say that's a gig that I really remember and love and got £10,000 for.
Fantastic. And the money's better now, I assume.
What
in terms of
well, for me, no. I mean, I don't think the money's better as a circuit comedian. I don't actually think now compared to when I started, that many people can earn a living just by being a circuit comedian. I mean, in the mid-90s and 2000s, you could earn a living just from being a circuit comedian. I think post-COVID, so many clubs have gone that people are doing all kind of other things with their comedy.
And very quickly, worst moments on stage?
Oh, God, I think it might have been when I took some drugs. I think we were showing off and taking drugs and it didn't work out. And no, maybe not. I don't know. I got attacked once. I mean, there's a few dodgy moments.
How did they attack you?
Well, they it was okay because they were young women, so I wasn't actually under any physical threat. But it was quite a surprise. They thought I was being racist. Again, back to interpretation of what you're doing, and they left, and the audience booed them. But where they were so pissed off, they came back and they stormed the stage. Well, that was a bit of a tricky moment.
Would you do comedy with someone else? Who would you like to?
What do you mean, as a double act? Or?
Yeah.
No. I don't even like writing with other people. I enjoy the.
What about TV and films? Would you go into that?
Yeah, I've done some acting and that, and I've done some TV, but I quite like acting. But I think, TV is just not the thing anymore. The moment we speak in history, TV is not important now. It's social media.
Social media.
And I've managed to, at this late age, and managed to connect with that. So I'm very happy.
If there were a documentary about you, what would you like to say? What would be the message?
Well, God, yeah. I mean, I think I don't know if it'd be a message, but I'd like to be historically placed. I'd like it to be this guy from this era and represents that era. And that's, this guy represents post-war East London the multicultural world. I think that's how I'd like to be considered.
What about something connected with a tour? Would that be interesting? Is touring exciting?
Well, maybe I'm too old to be excited. It's funny, my support act, Sam Piccone, he's also the architect of my recent success. He's the interventionist. He's never been to all these towns before because he's young, he's 32. So he's finding the whole thing quite exciting, whereas I've been everywhere, So it's not, what's exciting is going to a theatre where 500 people have paid 20 quid to come and see you, and you can't quite believe that. And they're there for an hour just watching you, loving everything you say, and wanting to meet you afterwards. That's a fantastic thing.
How do you know when it's a success?
Well, they're laughing, aren't they? That's the thing with comedy, isn't it? If you know it instantly if it's working or not. It's not like music, is it, where you have to wait for them to clap afterwards or something. If they're not laughing, then it's not working.
And do you ever get stormed by men or women afterwards?
Yeah, well, yeah.
A bit like the Beatles,
Yeah, well, you do, yeah. I mean, you actually do. It's not... I mean, it's more reserved than that, but they queue up and want selfies and want to... What's fantastic about this tour? Are we winding up now? Let me just say, what's so fantastic about this tour for me is that the people that are coming to watch me on this tour have connected to my comedy through Instagram. There's no gatekeepers. They just love the things I talk about. And when they queue up afterwards to meet me, they're all characters from my routines. They're all people that have felt included in my world because I talk about my gay son and my Jewish dad or my black wife. And they're all there in the audience. They're all queuing up, going, yes, black wives with their white husbands, dads with their gay sons or whatever. They're all queuing up, and there's something so beautiful about that for me. And I think that's the best thing. Okay. The money's better as well.
Thank you, Jeff. We've got to round up. There's a football match.
Okay.
Adrian wants to see it.
Okay, no worries, man.
I'm going to take...
I think we got some stuff done, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely. Appreciate it. Quickly take a picture. I will take the mic. Thank you.
I feel privileged. I'm in good company. I looked at some of those people and thought, wow.
Pleasure.
He's got some big names.
Yeah, it'll be out soon in a few weeks. We got some good moments. Oh, hang on. Oh, yeah. This podcast is kindly sponsored by Camera Museum of London at 44 Museum Street. Should you have any questions, comments or suggestions, please get in touch. This is your host Richard Lipman, and thank you for listening.